Welcome to the GM's Corner, a Brewster Baseball Association podcast where we put BBA GMs on the hot seat and try to pull out all of the most important secrets they use to beat me. My guest is Atlantic City General Manager Joshua Biddle. Joshua's been with the league for, I think this is your fourth year, right, Joshua?
That's correct. Fantastic.
Welcome aboard. Thank you for your time this afternoon. I know you're just getting off your side job as a real person, so I appreciate you taking the time to join me.
Thank you for the invite.
So Atlantic City, 47 and 34, I think, as we speak.
Yes.
How are you feeling right now? You're 4 games over your Pythagorean performance. The media guide put out a 78 and 84 prediction for you, so you're clearly overperforming that. What do you think about the Gamblers?
Well, I mean, I felt a whole heck of a lot better before Glenn Gorman went down with injury. But overall, I mean, yeah, that's certainly we're performing above where even I expected. I kind of thought I was better than what people were saying, at least with record-wise. I kind of figured we would be more 500 plus minus maybe 2 or 3 games. So right now, things are just clicking, and for whatever reason, we're winning and beating some pretty good teams as well. So the Gorman injury could very well hurt that, and obviously Vegas is currently surging. In terms of the prognosis, I would say if we're able to hold on to a final wild card spot, that would probably be the best case scenario. But other than that, I would say anything over 500 would be what I would consider a successful season.
You took over a intriguingly positioned club. You won 71 games your first year. I think you were 500 last year.
That's correct.
When I look at your raw statistical output, you start looking at the individual items and you kind of go, well, this looks like an average team, but it's 47 and 34 right now. What's your take on why you're performing as well as you're performing? Is it all about Gorman?
He's certainly a big part. I would say Paramutter, the left fielder, Stanley Paramutter, he really has come on. Even he showed a little bit towards the end of last year after the trade where we sent Hyuk Chang over to Mexico City and acquired Paramutter, who at that point was in AAA. I would say he's way overperforming what I would have expected, but he's right now hitting 276, 369 on base percentage, good for a 1.9 WAR. So, I mean, that's pretty cool. 22 home runs, tied for 5th in RBIs with 64. So I would say he's been somebody who's been a surprise performer.
You've got a lot of young position players that are coming into their own. That actually may end up causing you some problems before it's all said and done. You got a bunch of them that are going to be coming up to their arbitration years at the same time period as you're trying to pay a pretty good chunk of money to your pitchers, right? I mean, you've got a really nice shortstop in Jose Vela, who's going to be approaching arbitration. Derek Kennedy is going to be approaching arbitration. Your center fielder is also, I think, heading toward arbitration.
Correct.
So it seems like your salaries are going to start increasing in that area, but you're a very pitching-heavy squad. Is that something that fits your personality? Is that something you decided to do when you first took over the team? Or
I would just say from the beginning, it's been very fluid. I feel like we took over a team that was kind of at the end of contention to some degree. I mean, we didn't have a strong minor league system. We still really don't. But I think they got to the round right before the Landis, the year before I took over. So they had a strong run there, and I feel like the prospects were kind of traded off in order to try to make one last serious run. So at that point, I wasn't really sure exactly what to do, and even being relatively new to OOTP and just the sim in general, I would say my team and my philosophy is more towards the hitting side, so that's why I found it to be, I guess, a good idea at the time to start to re-sign Boone Carlisle and put his 0 third base rating out there. I thought that would be a good idea. And I remember even seeing on the forum just some of the posts where I'm really impressed by everybody's level of detail and analysis, because there were, some reviews of defensive efficiency and things like that, and things I clearly had never really even considered, even casually playing solo mode for time periods where I didn't really win a lot, and I kind of think I realized why now. Given that, then obviously I kind of had more of a priority on defensive-oriented players too, which is hence why we have Vila at shortstop and Dornster, who I really like, is a nice all-around guy at third base. Just trying to have more of a balance between defense while not sacrificing offense totally.
Yeah, I think the guys in this league have a lot of nuance, so there's a lot to learn every day here.
Absolutely. And even when I look back at the original team I had, even people who I viewed as keepers, that's changed. Obviously, Cannon was the one. He was a surefire pitcher who's clearly a franchise player. But Chang was someone I looked at that point. He has a 9 contact rating out of 10. I thought he would be sort of a leadoff guy for the future. But, not having the plate discipline to draw the walks, and for whatever reason, as fast as he was awful on the base paths. And how do you have 5 range when you're as fast as he is? It reminds me of my friend from middle school who was like 6 foot in 7th grade and couldn't get a rebound. So yeah, so that's my stance on that. But either way, we ended up having to trade him. But I liked he was a captain and a fiery personality, so he was cool to have around. But it just became a tougher fit when you realized the negative zone rating, and putting a guy at DH who isn't a power guy for me personally is a little tougher pill to swallow.
When you're looking at some of those players that have holes, right? I mean, they're fantastic in certain ways, but they have holes. Either you use them in specific roles to try to mitigate their holes, or they're really the kind of player that a rebuilding team uses to carry them on through. When you were looking at that second year going into the playoffs, were you doing anything particular to try to optimize your performance, or was that your pitching was just so good?
Yeah, it was the pitching. I would say for sure it was the pitching. They really carried us that year.
Well, and they should have.
Yes.
When you put $60 or $70 million into your pitching staff, it really ought to do something.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
How did you feel about that aspect? Because I know that'll be on people's mind, that when you drop that kind of change on 2 pitchers, you broke Yellow Springs' 9 fan start by stealing away Eduardo Lopez at the exact moment that we needed him most. So what was going through your mind on those big signing days?
I think at that point we may have 1 or 2 more years of contention, so we may as well go all in. We had such a young roster, other than that, with the exception of, I think at that point, Biddle and Sanchez, who had sizable salaries, but they were coming up towards the end of their contracts. So we're just like, well, with the fact that so many players are playing with minimum contracts or close to minimum, may as well just go all in for this. Because at that point, being new to the team, and I didn't want to make any rash decisions tearing it down completely and rebuilding or something like that. So I was like, well, if we go all in with this and we're competitive for a couple years, we'll see what happens. Or if we're not competitive, we'd probably trade some of the guys who would end up being bigger salaries down the line and kind of rebuild from there. So, and they would be the main primary contracts on the books, really, and it wouldn't hurt us too bad financially. But we've been able to stay relatively competitive, even though now Lopez obviously is sort of, not performing anywhere near his salary and probably won't, thanks to the injury he sustained last season.
That was a heartbreaker.
That was. But, the fact we're still contending, even with him really not contributing, is just a testament to the overall performance of the organization and players that we have. So we'll have to see how it plays out. But Correa's, he's fallen off a little bit, but he's still okay pitcher. So we'll just see how things play out.
When you look out into the future, kids going into arbitration are going to start eating up some cash.
Mm-hmm.
You literally have in Cannon and Correa and Lopez, you've got a total number of 70 million now tied up in those 3 starters. You start doing some math and you get up to the salary cap or your budget cap fairly quickly. What kind of plans do you have in place right now for 2035, 2036?
Yeah, we'll have to kind of see how those play out. The salary number right now takes into account a few options on players that we won't bring back, like Daliel, who's a backup infielder, and Jose Gutierrez, who we kind of wish we did have bring back, just because he's been killing it this year out of the setup role with a 3-0 record and a save, a 0 ERA, and a .40 WHIP in 22 2/3 innings. So pretty good, and pretty happy with that. And just our bullpen.
I would say he needs more innings.
Yes. Even a few of the relief pitchers we signed during the offseason, Durand, made the All-Star team for us as a closer, although he kind of has left a sour taste in our mouth the last couple weeks because he blew 2 saves versus Jacksonville, so that hurt. And I think he played for them too prior. And then Esteban Gil, who was just sort of a guy whose ratings had kind of fallen off a little bit, but he's a 1.93 ERA in 11 appearances, so he's been decent too. So the bullpen's at least we've had more trustworthy people out of the bullpen than I have had in my tenure, so that's been cool.
Let's talk about your farm system. You mentioned that the farm system you took over was not particularly well staffed, and you didn't think that it still was. What are you trying to do there?
I guess the main thing is just trying to focus on drafting well. We haven't really gone the route of trading people for prospects yet. We did maybe the first year when we had a few guys that trade off in 2031 when the certainty of the competitiveness for 2032 was an unknown. But it was more kind of, I guess, lottery ticket prospects, you'd say, not premier people. I'm happy with some of the people we've drafted, so that's at least a good thing.
So when you draft, are you drafting best athlete available, or are you looking at specific positions? Do you have it plotted out? How do you go about it?
It's definitely best athlete available. That's how we've always done it across all the different sports that we have sim teams. It's just trying to get the best talent you can regardless of position, because you never know who's going to develop properly and not develop properly anyway. So you may as well get the guys who have the highest ceiling. So that's always been the thought. And actually, I would say even so, in terms of helping our minor league system, we've been kind of like our first rounder a few years ago, who was an outfielder. We traded him in order to get a pitcher, Venegas. So we've still been kind of flipping prospects for people to try to keep us competitive, especially cheap, high-end talent at the major league level. Just obviously we need lower-cost guys, similar to Gorman. That was an attractive thing, and to try to trade for him as well was because of his potential and the fact that he was on a minimum contract. So that's been sort of the way we've been trying to counteract our salary constraints.
Did you actually envision Gorman becoming what Gorman became?
That was the hope, yes. I mean, we were kind of relying on hopefully this trade he would turn into that. I mean, he hit very poorly for Long Beach, if you saw that. He was hitting sub 200, when he was caught up. And Fajardo, the main major league guy who we traded in exchange, he just was kind of someone I didn't really trust either as a starter or a reliever at that point. But I would say both were probably underperforming what you'd expect given their ratings. So it was kind of a logical trade to attempt, and I don't think he really had room on his roster for Gorman, given some of the, he has a lot of talent on his team. So it made sense to try to roll the dice on a 10 power 8-eye guy just to see if he could become sort of the threat he has become. So it's worked out better than I thought.
I think that whenever the Atlantic City Gamblers roll the dice, the rest of the league ought to be very, very careful. All right, let me put you on the lightning round hot seat. And then when we're done with that, if you'd like, I'll turn the questioning microphone over to you.
All right, sounds good.
Strategy settings. Which ones are most important, and what do you do with them?
I usually let my manager take care of it.
Favorite sim racing memory?
Sim racing memory, wow.
Sim racing memory. The league needs to know about this sim racing thing.
I can't even call it a fond memory, but I guess as a quick background, yes, from 2010 to 2014 or so, I ran in a league called Enough World. And, we mocked the NASCAR schedule. So literally from February through November, we ran on Wednesday, Thursday, and Saturday. And Saturday night was the cup race, so we ran 100% length. So these races took like 3.5, 4 hours typically. And we usually had like 30-plus cars that made the race. I would usually finish about the 50 percentile. So if there was like 30 people, I'd finish about 15th. I could never crack consistently the top 10, which was frustrating. But my last year, I remember the Coke 600, which is one of the crown jewel races. It's a 400-lap race. So after 300 laps, I was running 5th place with no damage at all. And somebody spun out literally right in front of me in the corner and drifted back up the track and put me in the wall. And I was so upset. I still finished 8th that race, but that's the tough part about sim racing too, is you can try to run your own race and keep your car out of trouble, but it's not everything's in your hands there. Similar to other sports, there's always things that come down to chance and circumstance.
Oh yeah, no, I ran a lot of sim racing for several years back in the old GPL days, and I did some iRacing too. So
awesome.
I don't know whether the rest of the league will care about it, but we can both geek out on the sim racing stuff.
That's right.
Best thing about the Atlantic City Gamblers that no one else is talking about?
I would say, I guess, I don't know if everyone realizes it, but I kind of what you spoke to, I guess, in terms of the salary part, it's not the greatest when they come up for arbitration, but it's overall a pretty young team. I think people immediately, of course, when you think of Atlantic City, most people probably think of Lopez and Correa, and obviously they're the older two on the team. But for the most part, it's a really young team. Of our starting position players, nobody's older than 26, and the pitchers, other than if you subtract Correa, same thing. So it's a young team. So hopefully with a young team, they continue to get better, and maybe that helps to create a more positive prognosis as we move forward.
Which team do your Atlantic City fans consider your biggest rival?
That's tough. I mean, my first year, I just think of how Montreal was annoying because they literally would beat us like 19-1 or 20-1 regularly because we had no defense. And then some of those games are the first ones that come to my mind is getting destroyed and getting frustrated watching. Because I usually sit there and watch the games. Like whenever a sim occurs, I'll download it and actually spectate each game and without looking at what the scores are. And I just get so angry watching those.
Oh, I love doing that when I can. It's a fantastic way of getting a real great feel for your team.
Exactly. But yeah, some of those 19-1 and 20-1 games were not so fun.
If you could add one piece to the Gamblers right this minute, what would it be?
Well, I guess since you say right this minute, how about another Glenn Gorman?
There can be only one.
That's right.
Last question for the lightning round. How did you find the BBA and what made you want to join it?
That's a good one. So I think it was on the OOTP forums. Kind of like, I guess, dating back to the sim racing thing, I like the whole fictitious environment. I was in a Madden league, and it was the same thing. You had your own team, your own stadium, created everything. And I've always loved that whole fictitious environment and creating your own franchise. So the other thing about the BBA that was cool was just how long it's been around. That's one of the things before I would join a league I'd want to see is just to make sure it's sustainable and it's a league that is going to be around, and I'm not going to join and invest my interest in something that's going to be gone like in 3 seasons or something like that. And the history of the whole Brewster is intense, and that's the thing that attracted me to it. And then just also looking at the forums and just seeing how invested everyone else is, and again, just learn so much you can learn from all of the data and the analysis by everybody, and the competition's great too. It's I'm kind of in a way kind of glad I didn't win the Landis that second year, because I mean you'd still be hungry to win, but having to kind of build it with your own team and your own vision and win, I'm sure that's much more fulfilling.
We will allow you to lie like that. That's completely fine.
Perfect. I enjoy lying.
Alrighty, so you've survived the lightning round. Do you have a question you'd like to have me address?
I guess one thing I'm interested in, because it kind of goes back to the whole thread about, would you prefer having a team that's like a perennial wildcard team that may not realistically have a high percentage chance of winning a championship versus being a team that's, rebuilding, so you're down in the standings, but you have a strong minor league system. So similar to that, what is your stance on when to rebuild and how to go about it?
Well, my first stance is that all BBA teams except Yellow Spring should always be rebuilding. But I don't think that the rest of the league is going to go for that. I don't know. That question is one that I think is fraught with danger. I think that it's also personality-based. My answer on the forum was effectively a none of the above, right?
Right.
Because of those two, I would choose to be a team that perpetually was capable of making the playoffs, right? The 85-90 win team.
Right.
But I think to me it is, a team like Las Vegas proves that's a false dichotomy.
True, and I'd even say is, to second that, even Atlantic City in 2032, I would say we were probably a worse team than Montreal and Las Vegas that year and somehow beat them. You just never know in the playoffs.
Yeah, you just never know. But I personally will rebuild when it becomes clear that I cannot be a 90 to 95 win team consistently. I don't want to be an 85 win, 90 win team. I actually want to be a 95 to 100 win team. I want to be a 95 to 100 win team all the time. From my sensibilities, it takes a little bit different mindset on how to run a ball club. I draft for position. I draft for depth. I generally have about a 7-year plan. So my toggle is when I start looking at my team and I don't think this team can win 95 games. It's time for me to re-look at what I'm doing. And so a rebuild almost looks like a retool in a sense. So if you look at what Matt's been doing in Las Vegas, he does some really similar kinds of things. If you look at what I've done with my trading of Earl Jackson and Jose Gonzalez and a couple of the other guys I'd like to trade, I've got backfills ready to roll in those cases.
Right.
So in that sense, I'm trying to rebuild on the fly. Now, the downside is, of course, if 1 or 2 of those young kids don't come up, then I'm going to kind of crash and burn. So there's no golden ticket.
I guess a lot of it is just making sure that if you're, trading people a year too early rather than a year too late, so you're getting a solid return on your investment.
Yeah, ideally, that's a portion of it. Another thing to pay attention to in my mind is your revenue stream versus your budget. For me, winning the division is the primary goal. I want to win the division every year because that will eventually translate into playoff stuff. It is a crapshoot, but it will eventually translate. It's hard to win your division when your salary, when your budget is lower than the salary cap. When I took over the Yellow Springs 9, I took over a team that had been tanking for a couple of years. I think it won 50 games or 55 games the year that I ended up taking over. It had a couple of really nice players in its minor leagues, but its finances were completely shot. It took at least 2 or 3 years to even get the finances rolling to such a position where I could actually begin to build what I'll call a real team, right? So I was busy for a couple of years picking up value-added veterans and short-term 1, 2, 3 year contracts rather than working on big stars. I mean, the idea of being able to come into the league and throw Eduardo Lopez a $30 million contract would be like nowhere near my mind in that situation.
Gotcha.
Because he just wouldn't have worked for me whatsoever. And at that stage, you're looking at minor league players and slotting them in over time and trying to decide when to start their clock and all of that good stuff, which I think is a skill set that is going to be even more important as we get the next few years and all these young players are starting to come to fruition.
Yeah.
That's me in my rambling response to that question. Anyway, I don't know if it did anything close to answering it.
No, it was good. It was good. I always like to hear the different philosophies on that.
There are so many ways of looking at a rebuild and so many ways of doing it. What Aaron did in Rockville was absolutely fantastic. When Stu rebuilt Louisville, he did a brilliant job of it, which is really annoying. Don't let anyone hear me say anything positive about Louisville. That's a non-starter with my group. So.
That's right.
But yeah, I love watching these organizations as they build themselves and remake themselves and try to decide when to make that. It's probably the most difficult decision of any general manager's decisions when it comes right down to it. I'm going to be vastly interested to see how Atlantic City does over the next couple of years with your salary situations and your youth and the big contracts. It's a fascinating problem set you got there, Joshua.
Yeah, it should be interesting.
All righty. Well, do you have anything else you'd like to add before we call it a podcast?
I think that's it for now.
Well, thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. It was fun.
The Brewster Baseball Association is an out-of-the-park baseball league commissionered by Mr. America himself, Matt Rechtenwald, and competed in by 28 outstanding GMs. You can check us out at montybrewster.net. You have been listening to the GM's Corner, a podcast where we put BBA GMs on the hot seat. Music is Cool Piano by Tigerius and is used under Creative Commons Attribution License. See you next time. Be safe. And always remember, don't trade with Louisville.